Hi everyone, if you're new to this podcast series, welcome. I'm Niamh O'Donnell, a client director in the Life Sciences team at Gate 1 and host of our Life Sciences in the Spotlight series. If you've listened before, then a big welcome back to you. Thanks for joining us again. Today's topic is precision medicine, sometimes known as personalized medicine. And we found a really cool quote actually that kind of nicely summarizes or at least adds a bit of color to what precision medicine is. Hippocrates, the Greek physician and philosopher, is meant to have said that it is more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has. It is an innovative approach to tailoring disease prevention and treatment that takes into account differences in people's genes, their environments and lifestyles. The goal of precision medicine is to target the right treatments to the right patients at the right time. In 2022, the global precision medicine market was valued at $73.5 billion US. So it's certainly a space that leaders in life sciences are really focusing on today, or indeed should be. Here today to talk to us about precision medicine and the challenges and trends in this space is none other than Jason Foster, CEO of Orio Biotech, with a passion for health tech and startups, whose LinkedIn tagline is one of my personal favorites. It says, "Not afraid of doing hard things." Jason, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Niamh. It's great to be here.
Jason, you've had a fascinating journey. You've passion for health tech and startups, helping smart founders do great things, which is a note I captured on our last call, and I loved that. Your background, you've spent around 20 odd years building health tech businesses and taking them from 5 people to 400 and multiplying that across different continents. I heard that you're much happier at that earlier building phase than perhaps managing those large enterprises, and you're an angel investor. There's so much on your background in your LinkedIn that is so colorful and expansive. But just give us a little bit of a flavor, maybe build on that a little bit for our listeners and lead us to why we're talking today about this fascinating topic.
Yeah, thanks again for, if you say I have a fascinating history, I'll take your word for it. It's one of those things where in retrospect, it all looks very well planned. But when you're in the moment, you're sort of just doing the best you can with the information you have. It's not at all dissimilar from a startup and being in the company where you have to make those decisions on a daily basis. So as you said, I've been working kind of in the startup ecosystem for the better part of the last 25 years, which makes me sound very old, but the facts are the facts. So, my very first startup was in the .com bubble in 2000. It imploded after only 10 months. A great learning experience, but one that I wouldn't trade for anything, but also, one that you hope not to repeat if you can avoid it. And then, if you fast forward all the way to Orio, where I am today, this is my 3rd or 4th startup. So I think there are certainly some learnings that are transferable across industries, across time frames, across different types of companies. And what I try and do today is work, as you said, with smart founders who are doing big things and doing interesting things. Most of that lands me in the health or health tech field. I call it health tech. We went through a phase of digital health. I think we were calling it for a while. Some people called it med tech for a while. I think those things have kind of normalized, where I do anywhere that healthcare and technology intersect is an area of interest for me. That could be like a SaaS business that you sell, a solution into a hospital. That could mean a tech bio business where we're trying to solve cancer, and anywhere in between. So that's what gets me up in the morning, excited to go to work, and I'm very excited to talk about some of the work that I'm doing with founders and with startups currently.
Excellent. And it sounds already like there's some serious meaningful change happening in the space that you're operating in, and you're a key player in that. So in terms of our topic today, Jason, thank you for that introduction and building on that. Talk to us, what does precision medicine mean to you, and as well in your day-to-day and how you're working with these other companies and investors?
I mean, I love that. I hadn't heard the Hippocrates quote that you had pulled out. I think that's great. I mean, that is a great definition of what personalized medicine should be. What it is might be a little bit of a different discussion. So I think historically, certainly now, and let's say for the past 5 to 10 years where this has been a topic of discussion, we most often think about tailoring a generic intervention to the right patient population. So we use diagnostics or genetic sequencing or other things to say, who is the patient population that will respond or be most likely to benefit or most likely to respond from a particular intervention? And that is one way to personalize medicine, because right now, most people don't know this, but you, I'm sure, do, and your audience probably will as well, that the vast majority of people don't respond to the medications that they're given by the doctor. Something in the 70 or 80% often. It's a generic intervention that actually doesn't work for the vast majority of people it's given to, which is a massive waste of resources for the healthcare system. But that's the best we can do today. So I think the current definition of precision medicine is, how do we find that 20% that are going to respond to that intervention? And that has value for sure. That is not an easy thing to do. There's a flip side to that, however, which is actually one of the areas where I currently work and I'm spending a lot of time, which is, how do you make an individualized intervention and individualized medicine for a single patient? So you may start with some of that patient's genetic material or their cellular material, immune cells. In the oncology space, we've got cell therapy and gene therapy, which often rely on that kind of intervention. That's a totally different type of precision medicine intervention. And that has a very, very high, much higher success rate, because we are tailoring that solution for an individual patient. However, the downside is that obviously those economies of scale we get today by making, generic tablets that we're stamping out in factories and sending out to the pharmacy or the chemist, depending on which side of the pond you're on, is much more difficult. So you have very expensive medications. They're often logistically very complex. Their manufacturing process is very complex. So there's nothing easy about either of those ends of the spectrum of precision medicine. There's nothing easy about either one, but we can certainly see the value there. There's massive clinical benefit for patients available to us there. And also, I would say, at the end of the day, by making these medicines more targeted to those that will benefit, we'll see tremendous financial benefits to healthcare systems as well.
And what impact on both sides of that precision medicine scale? And I love how we're double clicking into that individualized medicine point as well. What impact is this having, do you think, Jason, and from what you've seen, on the life sciences landscape? And can you share some tangible examples of where it's being applied to improve patient outcomes, those clinical outcomes you mentioned?
I mean, certainly we're seeing a tremendous amount of investment put into, a new generation of diagnostics and therapeutics that are meant to sort of take advantage of these new modalities or these new opportunities to be able to tailor the impact for patients. And that's drawing a lot of interest into the field, it's drawing a lot of investment into the field, and that's great. It's great for all the startups and all the companies that currently invest. One of the most tangible, I would say, examples of this where it's having, a massive clinical impact is in the area of cell therapy. If you walk down the street today in London or New York or San Francisco, and you ask people, are there cures for cancer today? Most people would say, I don't think so, or no, or I don't know of any. If you mention CAR T therapy to them, most people would look at you with a blank face, like, what are you talking about? But however, there are interventions today, cell therapies and some gene therapies, that offer curative potential. So can cure cancer for some patients, many of the patients, and also rare diseases. Some of these types of diseases, one of the most widely known one would be something like sickle cell anemia, which has recently just had a gene therapy approved. What's today a lifetime of blood transfusions and pain for the patient could potentially cure them by essentially fixing their genetic makeup. And this is incredible. It sounds like science fiction, but it's incredible that we're able to do that. And so these medicines are reality today. We have cures for cancers like leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma, which are mostly blood cancers, hematological cancers, that most people can't get access to, unfortunately, and they don't know exist because it's a relatively new modality, but they're also very expensive products, which is where we are today in the kind of development cycle. We've sort of at the early phases where we're figuring out how to make them efficiently and how to make them widely available and make them cost effective. But those clinical impacts are happening today. 9,000 patients last year were treated with CAR T therapy as an example, and those would be multiple myeloma, leukemia, and lymphoma patients. And the vast majority of those will have had a great or a very positive clinical outcome, sometimes a cure. They won't say the word cure until they've been cancer-free for 10 years. So it takes time, but we have had some of the very first patients who were dosed in clinical trials be pronounced as cured of cancer because they've reached that 10-year window. And that's a very exciting thing for humanity, not only as, startups in the healthcare field.
I'm actually, and I know this does sound a little bit cheesy, Jason, but I'm genuinely getting some goosebumps listening to you. Imagine the hope and the feeling and the emotions of those 9,000 patients. And living their life so far not having that. That is incredible.
I mean, just to kind of put another, layer on it, these are the sickest patients. So today's therapies are reserved to last line. So they cost somewhere between $500,000 on the CAR T side to up to $4.5 million just for some of the gene therapies per patient. So these are very expensive interventions. However, the patients that do get access and do get treated are incredibly sick. They've been through multiple rounds of chemotherapy. They've often had a transplant. They have no other options. And to then have a transformative clinical outcome to say, we're trying this out on the people that are going to be the hardest to cure. And something in the 70, 80, even 90% of patients have a complete response, meaning they are put into remission immediately. It's an incredible, absolutely incredible intervention that, part of my work every day is to make sure that as many patients as possible can have access to these therapies, because 10 million people a year are diagnosed with cancer. And that's a statistic that not many people know.
I can sense the passion in your voice and from your face as well, Jason. So appreciate you sharing this really key insight with us. Moving ahead then to the challenges and the trends of precision medicine, what do you see those being in the future in this space?
So, I think we need to continue to progress with the technology around the interventions, around the healthcare. So how do we identify those patients? And can we get, for example, DNA sequencing down to, I think, it was incredibly expensive. I think we're now about, at least in the last 5 years, we've been about $1,000 per patient. I think we're on track to get to about $100 per patient. And when you get to some sort of tools like that are affordable, you could potentially sequence every patient that was relevant to really understand what's the best intervention for them. How are they going to respond potentially? Like, who are the best patients to target in a clinical trial? So I think as technology advances continue to move forward, you'll see more and more precision in our interventions and the way we treat patients at a more affordable cost. Again, we're sort of talking about, cell therapies as one of those potentially. The company that I run is a company called Orio Biotech. I've been with the company for 5 years. We are trying to ensure that we can manufacture those products much more affordably and in much larger quantities. So, rather than having to keep them and save them to the very end when the patient's very, very sick, couldn't we treat them earlier as a first line or second line intervention, not put them through chemotherapy and all those other harsh interventions, but only if we can bring the prices down. At $400,000 a patient, it's very hard to treat lots and lots of patients. But if we can reduce the cost to manufacture and allow, manufacturers to provide those products at lower costs, then we can treat many more patients. So I think there's this kind of technology adoption curve that needs to happen in order for us to really make precision medicines available at scale and to become part of our normal course of treating patients. As we all know, you go to the doctor, they write you a prescription, you go to the pharmacy, they give you a bottle of tablets. That's the most common intervention. And even on the biologics, the second pillar of medicine, which have been incredibly successful, Humira and others, those are generic. They're not made for a specific patient or even targeted to a specific patient based on anything about them other than their disease condition. That is the direction of travel we're going. That makes, a lot of sense, both from an efficiency of delivery perspective, from a healthcare cost perspective, and also ultimately for an outcomes perspective. So I would expect in the next decade or two, almost all medicine becomes precision medicine. You have this ability to understand which sub-cohorts or which subpopulation amongst patients with a particular disease would respond best to which interventions, and or we begin to tailor those interventions directly toward certain patient populations or even individual patients, as we've said. But I don't know what the numbers are, but I think, probably 99% of interventions today are generic, kind of the old format, and less than 1% are precision. But I can see that shifting quite dramatically over the next couple of decades.
That's fascinating, Jason. And I'm thinking as well from a patient perspective, you mentioned the advancement of tech adoption. And of course, the goal as well as part of that is to reduce the cost so they're more accessible as medicines. But also, I imagine what's really key for these patients is the timing element. So the more efficient we are, the more quicker we get it at a lower cost that's more affordable, the quicker they get the medicine that's tailored to them and the quicker the outcomes are. Timing is huge for them, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I saw a horrible statistic a couple of days ago. The average rare disease patient goes through 8 misdiagnoses, and it takes 10 years for them to get properly diagnosed. Obviously, rare disease by definition don't happen that frequently. Doctors don't see them that much. But even using tools like diagnostic tools that can assist a clinician in their diagnostic process and take in some of those thin tail things that doctors don't see very much or that don't occur very frequently and catch them earlier. There's some diseases that I think there's a couple gene therapies where if you don't catch it within the first 6 months or 12 months of a child's life, actually the intervention doesn't work any longer. And some of them are terminal. So what happens often is the sister or brother of that individual, the firstborn of that family, will start to display symptoms of the disease, and then these siblings will get tested. So unfortunately, the intervention won't work for that older child because they've already started to display the symptoms, but the younger ones are then eligible to get the therapy because they haven't yet started to display symptoms, because you would then to go and test them to see if they carry that genetic marker or whatever. This is exactly what we're talking about is, how would we be able to create a system or a technology that allows us to test every baby, as an example, for some of these rare diseases, to be able to then guide the intervention to those patients that need it and not to those who don't. And that is the future that we see. Earlier diagnosis can be the difference between life and death for some of these diseases.
Literally. So Jason, a lot of our listeners as well are leaders in life sciences companies and players in this space. For a life sciences company that wants to really make a difference in precision medicine and diagnostics and personalized medicine, whatever we refer to it as, what do you think and what have you seen are the key considerations to have in place to ensure success?
So it's a little bit of a tricky question, a chicken and the egg question, because, and I remember looking at just as a kind of an aside, it doesn't not exactly the situation you just outlined, but it has a very similar outcome in that actually selling all those generic interventions, it's a profitable approach, right? We're treating lots of patients, we're selling lots of medicines, and actually narrowing the scope of where our target market can go as a healthcare provider, as a pharma company or medical device company, it's not very good for business. And so this ability to make a economic case to those people who will be either facilitating the use of your intervention or paying for it ultimately, or providing it, it has to work. It has to make sense. So the example that I was thinking of is there is a company that I know that is a room temperature vaccine company. So as you know, vaccines often have to be stored at not only refrigerated, but even often frozen. Some of the COVID vaccines have that same set of considerations. And actually something like globally, like 50% of vaccines actually go unused. They go off, they go through their use by date and have to be thrown away. And obviously the manufacturers of those vaccines make money regardless if it's thrown away or administered to a patient. And so the kind of enthusiasm for this room temperature vaccine was relatively low, in that it might have the market for potential vaccine. Now, it's highlighting, healthcare is a business, and we need to make an economic proposition to all of the players in the business of healthcare to ensure that there's a viable intervention and a viable mechanism to do this. So when I talk to startups and I talk to innovators in this space, many of us come into this field as kind of starry-eyed dreamers hoping to make an impact in the world. Part of you should be that, have that focus. But also you need to be a realist about, where does the money flow in healthcare? The US spends something like, I have no idea what the number is, but it's trillions of dollars on healthcare. So that needs to work for all of, if you map the value chain for your particular intervention, there is often going to be a savings element that you're trying to pitch to in the NHS in the UK, we're going to want to save the NHS money. But actually the person who then pays for that intervention might be disconnected from the benefit of that intervention. We're saving money over here, but someone over here has to pay for it, and this person doesn't want to pay. So there's these kind of disconnections that happen throughout the healthcare system, where you have misaligned incentives, you have payers who, the people who get the value separated from the people who pay for the intervention. The system's fraught with those kinds of complexities. So I often help startups think through, okay, let's just say our technology works. We'll just take that as a given. Who's impacted? We want to make sure we're hopefully improving outcomes. Hopefully we're saving money, or by investing some, we're getting better outcomes ultimately. And there's this trade-off, and you need to solve enough of the problem to be meaningful to whoever's going to pay for it. If you're only solving this little bit of sliver of piece, and then there's problems down here and problems down here, the value actually doesn't flow through to the system or through to the patient. And so you need to look holistically at, what is the whole value chain here? What are all the bottlenecks in this process? What are all the challenges? And if we solve this challenge, does it actually have a positive impact that we think it would? Because in our narrow siloed view of the world, improving this small part of the process should have value, but it doesn't always translate into meaningful value for those that are going to have to purchase or, change the way they practice. And as you guys know, in change management and technology adoption, it's incredibly difficult to get people to change behavior. It's incredibly difficult to get people aligned and thinking in the same way. And so having these very clear sense of where the value is accrued, who gets the value that you're trying to bring, what's the impact on others that are adjacent to the intervention. This is why healthcare is so complicated and why it's taken so long. And some would argue we haven't done much of it, of disrupting healthcare. The way we do it today is incredibly inefficient. It's mostly sick care rather than healthcare. But a lot of that's because these institutions exist. People are scared if we change things too quickly, we'll hurt patients rather than help them. And so by design, it moves slowly and changes slowly. If I were advising my younger self 30 years ago, I might say, are you really sure you want to go into healthcare? It's so complicated. It's so hard to make the impact that we all are trying to make.
I love how you've been really candid and transparent there and actually cut through a lot of the stuff we see and hear online, in that there is that dichotomy at play in pharma. We are all in this business so we can make sure we get patient outcomes and can see what we do improving patient lives at the end of the line. At the same time, it would be remiss of us to ignore that the pharma leaders we work with don't have a bottom line to hit. So that balance of commercial making sure those patient outcomes are achieved is something that I really respect you calling out, really, because it's not something we hear that explicitly. So I appreciate you doing that, and it is important.
It is. I spent 25 years in the pharmaceutical industry and understand this kind of intimately. If you go into the bowels of Facebook or somewhere, you'll say, people would say, oh, the pharma companies are keeping people sick so they make more money. That is absolutely not the case. The structures of healthcare, because of the complexity, are difficult. They're inefficient. There's a fair amount of waste in the system, and it's no one's fault. This is the way the system works. And if we didn't have for-profit entities bringing innovation to the market, then we wouldn't have innovation. You look to nonprofit organizations or governments to drive innovation, it will never happen. So, human beings respond to incentives. One of the incentives is to make profits and to, deliver value. And that is not at all a bad thing. And we need to be recognized that that's the case and make sure that we are then aligning ourselves with that rather than trying to swim upstream and totally change the healthcare system in order for us to be able to help patients, because it's not going to happen, and it's certainly not going to happen quickly.
And I think I heard one of your key get rights there, which resonated and which I think is a really key takeaway for our listeners, is that when you're looking at this space and you're looking at precision medicine and personalized medicine, it's important to take a step back and really deeply understand and align on that holistic value chain and what that looks like. Starting with the patient first and then working our way back, but holistically looking and aligning on what that is, and then making a strategy and a plan and ensuring your operations are all set up to enable that.
Yeah, no, I saw that there's something like $2.3 billion to bring a cell therapy to market. So every time a company does their research, enters clinical trials, there are billions and billions of dollars they have to spend to even get the product on the market before they even get $1 of revenue. And that only 5 to 7% of the products that start out in the early phase, that kind of preclinical R&D phase, ever make it to market at all. So they're spending money on all the other 95% of things that interventions they're trying to get that one, that 5% chance. And that's just the economic reality of what it takes. And so, I think understanding these things and making sure that we're cognizant of the money flows, the value, who you're creating value for, everyone would love to invest in everything. If we had unlimited money, we'd invest in everything for every patient and, every intervention, and we'd fund everything. But that's just not the world we live in. And being an American, where obviously the healthcare system is very different in the US than it is in the UK, and I've been in the UK now for 14 years, the NHS does a pretty good job at those things that are kind of in the fat part of the bell curve. They're really trying to, those interventions that are common, that are well understood, and they're known to be effective in preventing disease and preventing future expenses. But at the thin tails on the margins, you have to wait potentially 10 years for a hip replacement. Now in the US, people would be shocked and dismayed by that. But ultimately, every healthcare system in the world is rationing healthcare because we don't have unlimited budgets. We wouldn't call it that. We'd call it formulary access, and we'd call it, coverage, and we'd call it, other things, waiting lists. But ultimately, systems have to ration care because we just don't have unlimited budgets to cover every disease under the curve. So it's super important to understand the economics of healthcare to be able to launch a company or launch an intervention and develop something that's going to be uptaken by clinicians and useful for patients.
Let's say then, Jason, you're back in a senior role in pharma. What would you be looking for in the biotech landscape where you are today to achieve the patient outcomes we've been talking about at scale?
It's a really interesting question in that, we've been looking for 2 decades at, they call it pill plus strategies, right? So it's the medicine itself, and then there's a set of accoutrements that come around it, other interventions, other supporting, I think companies would love to be able to offer, an app to support patients with compliance, an app to track outcomes. How do I ensure that patient can then get connected to other services they might need, whether it be, psychiatric or nutrition or whatever? Because ultimately, companies want the patient to get better. They want to have the clinical outcome. That's why they do what they do. But unfortunately, I think we've been very unsuccessful at driving those kinds of more holistic interventions that are beyond the therapeutic intervention or beyond the medical device. And I'd love to find a way to make that happen and actually create a value proposition, a business model that works. I think, people use all kinds of different apps for health and for, other types of tracking of, various metrics, et cetera. But could we potentially combine beyond just the intervention itself, beyond the pill, something that made sense? And generally, healthcare providers don't do it. They don't pay for prevention. But could we pay for, in some way, adjunctive care and something that goes beyond just the medicine? If I were, sitting at the top of Pfizer or someone else, you think about the GLP-1s, right, or the weight loss drugs, Ozempic and Wegovy in particular, they are going to be, or may already be, the largest products ever in the world. I think 50 billion of sales is the projected kind of peak sales of those products. And that's a fantastic return on investment for Novo and Lilly and the other companies that develop them. But what else? I don't have any idea. What happens if you stop taking those medicines? Do you gain the weight back? Is it, are we investing in behavior change and nutrition and educating patients on continuing to enjoy the benefits of those beyond just the time that they're taking the medicine? Or are they going to take it forever? And is this going to continue to have the impact? There's these kinds of things where we are in an unprecedented time with the amount of innovation, the different types of interventions that exist. How are we thinking laterally about how to support patients and support health systems to lower costs and improve outcomes beyond just a singular intervention to someone taking a pill or taking an injection every day for the rest of their lives, potentially?
Thank you, Jason. And I think that is a really great place to land our podcast episode today with the key question: how are we thinking laterally about how we support patients and health systems to lower the cost and improve outcomes beyond that singular intervention? Jason, you've left us with some really, really brilliant insight and certainly some food for thought. So thank you so much again for chatting with us today.
Thanks, Niamh. It's a topic that's really of interest to me, as you can probably tell, and would love to have a chat with anyone who's interested in similar things. You can reach me on LinkedIn. My profile is Jason C. Foster, or send me an email. I'd love to connect with the folks out there who are interested in improving healthcare for patients.
And that brings today's episode to a close. Thank you so much to our listeners for joining us, and I hope you tune in for the next one.